Alright, in this video I'm going to show how to install a nucleus hive into a full-size hive body. These are both deep Nuc hives that I recently got. So when I first get a Nuc hive, I like to keep them in the location that I want to have the hive for a couple days, just to kind of get them established in that location so that any bees that come out, they know where the hive is supposed to be. You could potentially move them directly to the hive bodies right away, but if any bees fly around, they may not have taken their orientation flight and you could potentially get some bees lost. It's usually not a big problem because any bees that do fly around, they're gonna kind of see where the hive location is, and in general they tend to come back. But I got these two, I believe it was I think it was 3 days ago, and they've been sitting here for 3 days. I don't yet have a hive stand for this location, so I'm just going to put them on the temporary boards for now. I have to get a hive stand put together and get that set up. But I'm going to move both of these to standard hive bodies, and I'll show you how it's done. First thing I'm going to do is get the new hive body set up. And all I have here, I have a deep super with 5 frames that have foundation. I don't have any drawn out comb. If you have drawn out comb, that's certainly nice because then the bees don't have to do a lot of work making wax, and you'll get a much quicker start on your honey production. So what I want to do to all of these is to spray them with sugar water. I especially like doing this with plastic foundation because sometimes bees are a little resistant to plastic foundation, and you really want to make sure they're heavily wax coated. So that's one thing that will get them to take them a little better. If they're not heavily wax coated, you want to coat them yourself. You can either buy them coated with wax, or you can put a coating on yourself, and you actually want to do probably 2 or 3 coatings to make sure that they're heavily coated enough, because if you do one coating, a lot of times the bees won't accept them and they just kind of treat it as unusable space, or they'll try and build comb in between the spaces, and it makes this huge mess. So really want to coat them heavy. These are heavily coated, but I've still found that sometimes bees are a little resistant to moving over to them. So you want to spray them with sugar water, and this is just a 1-to-1 sugar and water mixture that I'm spraying on here, and this will get the bees coming over to the foundation a little quicker, and hopefully drawing it out. And what I'm gonna want to do with these is I'm gonna put 2 of the frames over to one side and 2 of the frames over to the other side, and kind of put the cluster in the middle. I'm going to take one of the frames and put it right next to the brood, and then have the honey or pollen frame on the outside. That's going to make them draw this comb really quick and give the queen additional space to lay. I'm going to need a bottom board and a cover. I actually need an inner cover too, but I don't have any, so I'll have to bring one with me next time. I'm just going to put it as close as I can to this hive. I do like to use screen bottom boards. With a new smaller hive, the population's too small, so I don't typically use screen bottom boards. on a smaller population. And then I also consider using an entrance reducer because there's always a risk of robbing. And if you have larger hives in the apiary, the larger hives will target the small hives. So putting that entrance reducer on helps the guard bees keep any attackers away. The temperature is pretty high these days, so I'm a little, I'm almost tempted to leave the entrance reducer off just because the temperature is so high and it helps them ventilate the hive a little better. But we'll see what happens. So usually I would put an inner cover in there. I will have to bring one another time, but I just have a migratory cover, and this will just sit on there like that. So we're ready to get started here, and it's going to be a pretty simple process. I'm just going to move the frames over pretty much. I'm going to grab my hive tool and we'll get started. I have my smoker with me, but I'm not going to get it lighted up. I don't really think there's going to be a need. We'll see how aggressive they are, but it's a nice day, it's warm. It's probably 75 degrees and there's no wind. So these bees hopefully shouldn't be too mad. The foragers are already going out. So generally the older bees are tend to be the more aggressive bees, but a lot of the older bees are foragers, so they go out in the field. So if you check your hives during the day, a lot of times the more aggressive bees are gone. If you check them in the evening, a lot of times that's why you'll have more aggression, or really early in the morning before the bees have gone out, you get more aggression because a lot of the older bees are still in the hive. Looks like they propolis this down a little bit. I'll stick my hive tool under here. And just take a look on here and make sure the queen's not on here. And then I start moving these frames over. The Jester Nuc boxes are definitely nicer. I think the beekeeper I got these from said that he got these from Man Lake. They're actually made out of cardboard. The Jester ones are made out of some kind of plastic sheeting. This one is a drawn comb. Just trying to see if there are any eggs in here. The way the sun's shining, it's kind of hard to see if there's eggs in there. I don't see eggs. So I'm going to take this one and put it on the outside. Kind of looking for the queen while I'm doing this. I want to make sure she's in here. Here's a lot of young larvae. And on this side, there's some capped larvae. Maybe I'll bring the frame over to the camera. So you can see there's a lot of young larvae in here. Up at the top there is some older brood, and just kind of looking for the queen. The population seems a little sparse. I don't see the queen, but you can see on this side there's older larvae, and I always like seeing that in a Nuc hive. It's not a ton of it though. If you have older larvae, you get a better boost from the population. So that is one frame with brood, and we'll see how many other frames there are. This one has pollen, brood, some drone cells. This one has a lot more cap brood. Some brood emerging from their cells over on this side. They're taking those cappings off. And if you look, there's some gray fuzzy ones. So, oh, there's the queen up at the top. Right over there. Right there. Nice looking queen. So, I'm going to take this one, put it in here. Looks like a lot of bees in this frame, so that is good. And then I'm going to take a empty frame with foundation. I'm going to move it over. Continue putting these frames in with that empty frame. So that's going to really get them working on this frame, because bees, if there's a empty space in their brood nest, they will really focus on building that one out quickly. And I like getting that additional comb built out quickly so that the queen has additional room to lay. Because that's going to help boost the population as quickly as possible. If they don't build that out, she's just going to use the space that she has, and it will not give the population as quick of an increase. When a hive first starts growing, I'm not really concerned about honey. Honey comes later. Now this is a nice frame of brood. It's almost all capped. I don't see any bees emerging. There's some nice waggle dances going on there. I'll bring this frame over. But this is what I really like to see in a nuc hive. All of these bees, and it's pretty well laid out all the way to the corners. And I'll show you this side too. But it's pretty well filled in with capped brood. I don't see emerging brood, but I think it's, well, there's some young bees. Looks like they emerged pretty recently. They're still kind of wet looking. If you look carefully, you'll see some waggle dances going on. There's a bee up at the top that has some pollen, and I'll hold it up to the camera and maybe she'll remove the pollen and put it in. But anyway, this is a frame, this kind of frame is something that I love to see in a nuc hive. And when you see frames like this, you know that your bee supplier puts together good nucs for you. If you see a bunch of young brood or no brood, those really aren't the greatest nucs to purchase. And when you're spending a lot of money on a nuc hive, you really want to see as much of that cap brood as possible. You also want to see some food frames in here, but usually there's food around the edges. So here's another really nice frame as well. There's a nice nuc hive. I'll show you this frame. This is cap brood, as well as older larvae, and there's some eggs and some younger larvae in there. So that is a really nice frame. And on this side, it's kind of similar. There's a lot of eggs, younger larvae, older larvae, and cap brood. And there is a a couple worker bees. They are heavily loaded with pollen, and they're looking for somewhere to put it. What they do is they find a cell, and then they kind of scrape it off and put it in the cell. And then other bees come along and they mix it with honey. And as they're mixing it with honey, they are putting enzymes in there and stuff like that. And then they put it back in the cell, and that becomes what is known as bee bread. And that is what they feed the larvae. And bee bread, it's actually fermented, a little bit fermented pollen and honey, or pollen and nectar actually mixed together. So I'm going to give them a pollen substitute, and this will give them a little boost, make it easier for them to raise some additional brood. I only have one pollen patty left, so I'm gonna, I believe these are 1 pound patties, but I'm gonna put this right next to the brood nest, and I'm gonna have to flatten it down a little bit because I don't have a inner cover. And then I'm going to take this one, I'm going to take this empty Nuc box, move it aside a little bit, slide this one over into the spot where the Nuc Hive was, and then I'm just going to take this, and since we know the queen isn't in here, we saw her on a frame, we can shake this off. If we didn't see her on a frame, we'd want to look in here very carefully to make sure we have the queen. We don't want to injure her. I never like shaking queens. You can do it, but it's always kind of risky. What I'm going to do here is just give it a good shake. And then I'll move this aside. Take the lid, shake that off as well, and move that aside. Now, I like to move their original nuc away from the space because they smell the hive, they smell their scent inside of the nuc box, and a lot of times the bees will try and go over to that. So I take it and I'll move it 15 feet away or something like that. And this will allow them to orient to their new location, or to their new hive. They have to get used to it because it looks completely different. I'm going to give this a good push because I have the pollen substitute on here, and I don't have an inner cover on here yet, which I really should. But since I don't, I want to make sure that cover is on nice and tight, and then I'm going to put a rock on here to keep the lid from blowing off. But this is essentially done. I am going to get some sugar syrup. If you give them a 1-to-1 mixture of sugar syrup, that will encourage brood rearing. It's kind of the consistency of nectar. In the fall, you want to give them a 1 part sugar or 2 part sugar, 1 part water mixture, and that's going to help them store the sugar water and turn it into food for the winter. But during the summer and the spring, when you're boosting a colony, you want to give them 1 part sugar, 1 part water mixture, and that's going to give them they're going to feel like there's a honey flow going on, and that's going to encourage brood rearing. And again, with a nuc, especially this one is getting started pretty late. It is the beginning of July, and normally you want to start a hive out about mid-May, early May. It depends on where you are. In Michigan, that would be ideal. But since my goal on this one is just to get to overwinterable population, I don't have to be as concerned with building it up to honey production. I'm not planning on getting any honey from this. If the population does get larger, I'm going to do splits and I'm going to make additional nucs. So that's kind of my goal this year, is to expand my apiary. So I'm not going to worry too much about getting honey production. So yeah, I have the goal of increasing the number of hives I have, but also drawing out foundation. In the first year when you're starting out, there's a lot of resources that go into drawing out foundation. That really puts a damper on honey production. So if I get a lot of foundation drawn out this year, I can get a lot more honey production next year. I'm just going to pour them some sugar water, and I'm using an entrance feeder on this hive. I'm not a super big fan of entrance feeders, but it's what I have available at the moment, and they do work for smaller hives. I prefer the frame insert feeders. The sugar water is still a little warm because I made it recently, but it should cool down. And that's it. The Nuc Hive is successfully installed into a hive body. And then we're going to move on to the next one.